The air was thick with the smell of sweat and iron. Across the scorched plains of Britannia, a sea of Roman shields locked edge to edge, forming a living wall of bronze and oak. The sound was not that of men, but of machinery. Thousands of scuta interlocked in perfect rhythm, advancing inch by inch through a hail of stones, arrows and curses. From the enemy's ridge, the Britons howled, their naked bodies painted blue with woad, their war cries echoing across the valley. They had never seen anything like this. No panic, no chaos, just a silent, deliberate advance, an army that moved like a single organism, every man a cell within an unstoppable beast. At its core stood the principle that had made Rome immortal: discipline over passion, order over chaos, structure over rage. When the front rank knelt, planting their shields into the mud, and the second row angled theirs above like a roof, the world seemed to close around them. Arrows clattered uselessly against the formation. Spears snapped. Slingstones rebounded. Within that iron shell, the legionaries felt no fear, only the thud of their own heartbeat and the rhythm of command echoing down the line. Advance. The enemy saw soldiers, but Rome saw geometry. This was not just a wall, it was a philosophy of domination. Centuries before that day, in the smoky training fields of the Italian hills, the Roman army had learned a secret older than empire: that the body could be broken, but the formation must never bend. Each recruit drilled until instinct replaced thought, until holding his shield to protect the man beside him felt as natural as breathing. The Roman shield wall, or Testudo, was more than a tactic. It was the physical manifestation of Rome's collective mind. The legionary did not fight for personal glory. He fought to preserve the structure, to keep the line intact, even as blood soaked the ground beneath his feet. The shield itself, scutum, was an extension of the man, curved to deflect strikes, wide enough to protect two bodies, rimmed in iron, and heavy as fate. When raised in unison, it became a fortress in motion, and when advanced under the booming rhythm of the centurion's orders, it became the heartbeat of empire. By the 1st century BCE, this formation had become the defining weapon of Rome's supremacy. Against the Gauls at Alesia, it broke the wild fury of tribes united under Vercingetorix. Against Parthian horse archers, it turned mobility into futility. Against Germanic berserkers, it transformed fear into mathematics. Each battle was a test of the same idea: that discipline could conquer chaos, and civilization could be built on the back of structure. The shield wall didn't just win wars, it shaped the Roman psyche. It taught that protection was power, that unity was greater than individuality, and that an empire's strength was measured not by the might of its heroes, but by the coordination of its masses. But there was another side. Behind the gleam of discipline lay fear, the fear of collapse, of one man's hesitation breaking the wall. In those moments, courage was not a shout but silence. No heroics, no wild charges, just endurance, the courage to stay still while death rained from the sky. It was this paradox, calculated violence restrained by order, that made the Roman military machine the most formidable force of the ancient world. And it was through formations like this that Rome expanded from a small republic on the Tiber into a superpower stretching from the Atlantic to the Euphrates. Yet every tactic carries its curse. The very system that made Rome invincible on the battlefield also made it rigid, slow to adapt, and blind to the changing nature of warfare. The same discipline that built the empire would one day turn into the chain that dragged it down. Tonight, we will march through that evolution, through the blood and brilliance of Rome's shield wall. We will uncover how an idea of unity turned into a tool of domination, how strategy became psychology, and how a wall meant to protect soldiers became a symbol of an empire that could not stop conquering. Because the story of Rome's shield wall is not just the story of tactics, it's the story of human nature itself, how power, once perfected, begins to destroy the hand that wields it. And it all begins here, on a muddy plain, under the grey skies of a dying century, where the shield wall stands, unbroken, against the chaos of the world. Before the roar of battle ever touched Roman ears, the empire's true weapon was already forged, not in blood, but in discipline. The Roman legion was not a collection of men. It was a system of perfection. Every movement, every command, every heartbeat synchronized into one rhythm, the rhythm of conquest. At its core stood the legion, a formation of roughly 5,000 soldiers divided into cohorts, maniples, and centuries, modular, flexible, and terrifyingly efficient. To outsiders, it looked like endless ranks of iron and red. But to Rome, it was a machine with 1,000 gears. Each part could function independently or merge into one devastating whole. A single centurion could command his century with the authority of a general. His soldiers would obey not because of loyalty alone, but because disobedience was a kind of death. Training was relentless. Hours of weapon drills, formation marches under the sun, and grueling simulations using wooden swords twice the weight of real ones. The body was conditioned to suffer, the mind to obey, the will to endure. To understand Rome's dominance, one must first understand its obsession with structure. A legionary's life was divided between training, discipline, and construction. When not fighting, they built roads, bridges, forts, and siege engines. Every camp they established at day's end was identical in layout. Rectangular, fortified, with streets aligned in geometric precision. By nightfall, each soldier knew exactly where to stand, where to sleep, where to die if needed. This was no accident. It was psychological warfare against chaos itself. Rome believed that if the world could be ordered, it could be ruled. The tools of the legion were extensions of this philosophy. The gladius, short and practical, was not made for showy duels, but for thrusting through the gaps of a collapsing enemy line. The pila, heavy javelins designed to bend on impact, denied the enemy the chance to throw them back. A small innovation that turned chaos into control. The scutum, curved and towering, was both shield and symbol, protection and pressure in one. Together, these tools formed the triad of domination: precision, patience, and permanence. When the legion formed its shield wall, the scuta overlapped like scales on a serpent. Each man's left arm guarded the right side of his comrade. The formation moved as one, slow, deliberate, and merciless. Arrows darkened the sky, yet the wall advanced. And as the enemy's fury broke upon it, the Romans would open small gaps, stab forward with their gladi, then close again. A breathing monster, devouring whatever stood before it. But beneath this flawless rhythm was something far deeper. Fear. Fear of failure. Fear of shame. Fear of breaking formation. Roman discipline was built on terror, not of the enemy, but of disgrace. Cowardice could mean execution. Desertion meant being stoned by one's own comrades. Even a unit's collective failure could invoke the ultimate punishment: decimation. 1 man in 10 chosen by lot, executed as a lesson to the rest. This brutal system did more than instill obedience. It created dependence. The soldier ceased to exist as an individual. He was part of the machine, bound to the man beside him, fused into something greater and far more terrible. The power of this design became clear on every frontier. In Gaul, it crushed disorganized hordes. In Egypt, it subdued rebellion without mercy. In Judea, it silenced revolt beneath an avalanche of formations. The legions were not simply an army. They were the manifestation of Rome's will to dominate the world. Even their march inspired dread. 12 miles under the burning sun, armor clattering in rhythm, each step measured, unbroken. The enemy could hear the empire approaching long before they saw it. And when the horns blared and the cohorts assembled, even silence became a weapon. Yet there was genius beyond cruelty. Rome's military machine was a laboratory of adaptation. From the Samnite wars to Caesar's campaigns, they absorbed every enemy's strength and turned it into their own. They borrowed from Greek phalanxes, improved upon Iberian steel, mastered siegecraft from the east. Nothing was beneath imitation if it meant survival. This was why, while others fought for honor, Rome fought for permanence. The legion was not designed for victory alone. It was designed for legacy. Every campaign expanded not only territory, but infrastructure. Every conquest left behind roads, aqueducts, and fortified cities. Arteries of empire that ensured its heart never stopped beating. But the most dangerous weapon was invisible: organization. Commanders could deploy or recall cohorts with mathematical precision. Logistics ensured supplies followed armies across deserts and mountains. Messages could travel faster than rebellion could grow. It was this fusion of intellect and brutality, of engineering and endurance, that made Rome unstoppable. The shield wall was merely the face of something deeper. a civilization that had turned war into science and soldiers into instruments of destiny. As the empire expanded, this machine grew too large to control. The wind howled across the hills of Gaul, carrying the scent of pine, blood, and fear. It was the autumn of 52 BCE, and Gaius Julius Caesar stood before the greatest gamble of his life. Below him, the fortress city of Alesia rose like a jagged crown from the valley. Inside, the Gallic chieftain Vercingetorix had gathered more than 80,000 men, the last hope of a continent resisting Roman rule. Outside, Caesar commanded only 50,000 legionaries. By every rule of war, he should have been crushed. But Caesar never followed rules. He rewrote them. Where other generals saw a siege, he saw an opportunity to trap an army within an army. His plan was madness or genius. He ordered his men to build 2 concentric lines of fortifications, one encircling the enemy inside Alesia, the other facing outward toward the plains, anticipating the inevitable relief force. 40 kilometers of trenches, ramparts, palisades, and towers, raised in weeks, under constant attack. Every hammer blow echoed like defiance. Every shovel of dirt was a statement of will. To his enemies, it was arrogance. To Rome, it was geometry in motion. As the walls rose, the Gallic warriors inside Alesia laughed. They believed no army could starve them while surrounded by tens of thousands of their kin outside. But Caesar's men knew no fear. Day and night, they worked in silence, their scooter stacked beside them, their gladi within reach. Soon the fortifications became a labyrinth, trenches lined with sharpened stakes, hidden pits, and caltrops. And at the center of it all, the Roman shield wall stood ready, a living rampart behind the ramparts. The first test came when the Gallic relief army finally arrived. An ocean of 250,000 warriors surging across the plains, horns blaring, drums pounding. They charged the outer line, hurling javelins and stones, screaming for vengeance. Caesar's men did not answer. They simply locked shields. From the towers, Pila rained down like iron hail. The first wave crashed into the Roman front and broke like surf against rock. The Gauls screamed, clawing at the shields, hacking with axes and spears. But the Testudo held. The Romans responded not with rage but rhythm. Shield forward, thrust, retreat. The motion was mechanical, almost ritualistic. Precision as terror. When the outer ranks faltered, reserves filled the gaps seamlessly. Centurions barked orders, their voices cutting through chaos like whips. The ground trembled under the weight of fury. But the wall did not bend. Then came the second attack, from within. Vercingetorix, seeing the outer assault, led his own men down the slopes of Alesia, hammering Caesar's inner defenses. The Romans were trapped between 2 armies. For any other force in history, it would have been annihilation. But Caesar had built his defenses like a mirror. 2 fortifications, 2 fronts, 1 mind. As the Gauls poured from the city, the inner legions formed ranks, shields overlapping in perfect unison. Arrows and stones struck from both sides, yet the formations held. Imagine the scene. 50,000 men enclosed in death's jaws, fighting on 2 fronts, and still maintaining formation. It was no longer battle, it was choreography. The shield wall became the axis of survival. It absorbed every strike, every scream, every desperate push. When one Roman fell, another stepped into his place without hesitation. When the wall was breached, the centurion charged forward with his vine staff, restoring the line with fury and faith. At dusk, the outer Gauls attacked again. Caesar rode along the ramparts, his crimson cloak visible even through clouds of dust. He shouted no words of encouragement, only commands. Cold, efficient, absolute. His calmness was infectious. His soldiers fought not as men, but as extensions of his will. When the final assault came, a massive coordinated push by both Gallic forces, the Romans appeared to be breaking. Trumpets blared, and Caesar himself entered the line, drawing his sword. The sight of their commander in the shield wall reignited the legionaries. With a roar that seemed to shake the earth, they surged forward, shields tight, gladi stabbing in perfect rhythm. The Gallic charge shattered. Their ranks collapsed, and as the night fell, the plain of Alesia was carpeted with the dead. Inside the fortress, Vercingetorix understood the truth. He donned his armor one last time, mounted his horse, and rode out in silence. Before Caesar's throne, he dismounted, removed his helmet, and placed his sword at the conqueror's feet. It was not just a surrender. It was the symbolic defeat of chaos itself. The victory at Alesia was not merely tactical, it was philosophical. It proved that discipline could triumph over numbers, that structure could outthink savagery, and that the Roman mind was as lethal as its weapons. The shield wall had turned flesh into fortification, will into geometry, chaos into order, but behind this triumph lay an omen. Alesia taught Rome that no enemy was unconquerable, and that belief would drive it to overreach. Every empire, after all, is destroyed not by its weaknesses, but by the perfection of its strengths. Victory has a scent, a mixture of sweat, steel, and the faint sweetness of triumph. But for Julius Caesar, the smell of victory at Alesia carried another aroma beneath it: ambition. As the Gallic resistance fell silent, he knew the battle was not truly over. The next war would not be fought with swords or shields. It would be waged in marble halls, beneath painted ceilings, against men whose daggers were hidden behind smiles. In Rome, the Senate feared what the legions worshipped. They feared the man who commanded obedience not through law, but through loyalty. Caesar's name had become a weapon sharper than any gladius, and every senator could feel its edge. The Roman Republic, once the model of balance and shared power, had become a stage of envy and manipulation. Senators spoke of liberty while scheming for control. Alliances were forged in whispers and broken in silence. And into this theatre of deceit stepped Caesar, the conqueror of Gaul, the master of the shield wall, the man who had turned discipline into empire. He returned to Rome not as a servant of the state, but as a force of nature. His legions adored him, his enemies envied him, and the common people, tired of corrupt nobles and endless wars, saw in him something greater, a savior. The Senate saw a threat. They tried to strip him of his command, to exile him from the heart of power. But Caesar understood the lesson of every battlefield. Once you build a wall, you decide who stands behind it and who does not. On the cold dawn of January 10th, 49 BCE, the Rubicon River glistened under pale light. Caesar stood on its banks, his cloak drawn tight against the wind. Behind him, his soldiers waited, silent, loyal, unflinching. Before him, the river that marked the boundary of Rome's laws. To cross it with an army was treason. To hesitate was surrender. He looked at the water and uttered the words that would end a republic and begin an empire. Alea iacta est. The die is cast. The same discipline that had built the shield wall now drove the republic to civil war. Rome itself became the battlefield. Streets turned into trenches, the forum into a command post, the Senate into an arena of betrayal. The political game was fought like war, with flanking, deception, and relentless pressure. Caesar moved his pieces across Italy and Spain with the precision of a general and the patience of a predator. Every rival was a formation to be broken, every alliance a tactical line to exploit. Behind him, the old guard rallied under Pompey Magnus, once Caesar's ally, now his mirror image and mortal enemy. Pompey commanded loyalty from the Senate, but not from the people. His legions were divided, his strategies defensive. Caesar's were surgical. When they finally met at Pharsalus, the battlefield was not just soil, it was ideology. Pompey represented the fading republic, Caesar the dawn of empire. And as the dust settled, it was clear that the same discipline that had crushed Gaul had now conquered Rome itself. But victory in politics is never clean. The Senate bent to Caesar, but it did not forget. Every law he passed, every title he accepted, dictator, consul, Pontifex Maximus, was a brick in the wall he was building around himself. He claimed it was for order. They whispered it was for control, and they weren't entirely wrong. Caesar's reforms reshaped the republic into an extension of his will: debt relief for the poor, land redistribution for veterans, calendar reform for time itself. Every measure both generous and strategic. He gave the people stability, but demanded loyalty in return, the same way the legions had given him victory and surrendered individuality. Rome itself had become his new shield wall. But no wall is perfect. The Senate, humiliated but breathing, began to plot in shadows. They spoke of liberty while sharpening blades beneath their robes. Among them was Marcus Junius Brutus, Caesar's protege, perhaps his friend, perhaps his doom. As Caesar's image began appearing on coins and statues, as he sat upon a golden throne during public games, whispers turned into panic. The Republic was dying, and the man who had once defended its glory now threatened its existence. In the spring of 44 BCE, the Senate met under the marble arches of the theatre of Pompeii. Caesar's death was not the end of the shield wall. It was its evolution. The generals who followed him, Mark Antony, Octavian, and later emperors, learned that armies could guard not only borders, but power itself. The wall had become political. It no longer defended Rome from her enemies. It defended her rulers from her people. When an empire conquers the world, it must also conquer the hearts of those it rules. Rome understood this better than any civilization before or after. The same discipline that formed its legions seeped into its streets, temples, homes, and mines, until every Roman, from senator to slave, lived by the rhythm of order and obedience. The shield wall was no longer confined to battlefields. It had become a way of life. In the streets of Rome, the echoes of discipline resounded through every step of the citizenry. At dawn, the markets opened with military precision. Bakers, merchants, blacksmiths, each performed their role as if following the commands of an unseen centurion. The empire ran like an army, and for a time, it worked. Order built roads that spanned continents. Discipline kept aqueducts flowing and grain shipments on schedule. The same hands that once wielded the gladius now constructed amphitheaters and temples. Rome's perfection was not born of chaos. It was engineered, brick by brick, by men who had been trained to obey. But beneath that precision was fear. The fear of disorder, the terror of rebellion. Every conquered province was a potential spark. Every whisper of dissent a threat to the structure Rome had spent centuries perfecting. To survive, Rome imposed its culture as armor. In Gaul, Spain, and North Africa, Roman officials established colonies that mirrored the mother city. Miniature Romes with identical laws, forums, and temples. Latin replaced native tongues. Roman gods replaced local deities. Architecture became propaganda. Arches, columns, and straight roads proclaiming, Rome is order, everything else is wilderness. It wasn't just conquest, it was assimilation. The people Rome conquered were not annihilated. They were absorbed. The empire didn't destroy foreign identities, it repurposed them. Local elites were invited into Roman politics, their children educated in Roman schools, their soldiers enlisted under Roman banners. And so the shield wall expanded, not just across borders, but across cultures. It wasn't a line of shields anymore. It was an ideology. Inside the legions, life was brutal but stable. A Roman soldier woke before dawn, ate barley porridge, polished his armor, trained, built, and obeyed. Punishments were swift, rewards scarce, and glory reserved for those who died well. To modern eyes, it was a life of suffering. To a Roman, it was purpose. Letters from ancient camps reveal a psychology as cold as it was proud. We fear not death, one legionary wrote, but shame. Better to be broken than to be useless. Every camp mirrored the discipline of the battlefield. Streets ran straight, tents were arranged by rank, and no fire was ever allowed to burn out a formation. Even in rest, the legion lived within walls, literal and mental. Yet amid this rigidity, a strange humanity survived. Soldiers sang crude songs while marching. They carved names and prayers into their shields. They adopted children from conquered lands, married local women, and left fragments of themselves scattered from Britain to Syria. Through these acts, the empire became a mosaic, coldly uniform, yet secretly diverse. For civilians, the shield wall cast both protection and shadow. Merchants thrived under Roman peace, the Pax Romana, as roads and ports united the Mediterranean into a single economic body. Farmers found markets, traders found safety, and the empire's citizens enjoyed the fruits of stability. But that stability had a cost. Every tax, every law, every census was a reminder that the empire's shield never lowered. The same discipline that built aqueducts also crushed uprisings. The same soldiers who built bridges were the ones who nailed rebels to crosses. Rome's peace, as the historian Tacitus wrote, was a desert, and they called it peace. And yet, the Roman citizen loved his order. To live under Rome was to live under certainty, the promise that tomorrow would resemble today. Even the poor, even the enslaved, found strange comfort in the empire's rhythm. The chaos of the ancient world had been silenced. But silence, when too perfect, becomes suffocating. The same rigidity that made Rome magnificent also made it fragile. Its bureaucracy grew heavy, its citizens complacent, its soldiers more loyal to pay than to ideals. The shield wall that once advanced across continents now stood still, defending not glory, but habit. By the 2nd century CE, Rome had conquered nearly all it could. The edges of the known world were now borders instead of frontiers. The legions patrolled deserts and forests not for expansion, but for maintenance. The machine had reached its limit. And for the first time in centuries, the gears began to grind. Because once an empire perfects control, the next step is decay. Empires rarely die in one day. They bleed slowly, not from the sword, but from the rot within their armor. For centuries, Rome had survived every enemy. Barbarians, drought, rebellion, plague, all were met with the same iron response: formation, discipline, control. The shield wall that once advanced across the world now stood watch along its borders, unyielding, unmoving, eternal. But even the most perfect wall begins to crack, not from pressure outside, but from weight inside. By the late 2nd century, the rhythm that had once defined Rome began to falter. The legions that had marched in perfect synchrony now hesitated. Recruitment slowed, loyalty waned, and for the first time, the empire's greatest weapon, its discipline, began to decay. The warning signs came quietly. Commanders grew rich, soldiers grew restless. Emperors rose and fell faster than the seasons. The very structure that had once made Rome indestructible now strangled it. The army had become too vast, the bureaucracy too heavy, the people too dependent on the state to remember how to fight for it. Rome had built walls, not just of stone, but of complacency. The Pax Romana, once a symbol of divine order, had dulled the Roman soul. A generation raised in comfort no longer understood the hunger that had built the empire. Veterans were replaced by recruits drawn from the provinces. Men who fought for pay, not for pride. The shield wall still stood, but the minds behind it were different. Obedience remained, but conviction had vanished. The cracks widened under the strain of crisis. In 165 CE, the Antonine Plague swept through the empire, killing soldiers faster than any enemy could. Camps turned into graveyards. Cities fell silent. Entire legions disappeared from the record. In their absence, emperors filled the ranks with hastily trained foreigners, men who neither spoke Latin nor cared for Roman ideals. They fought well enough for gold, but loyalty had a new master: whoever paid more. For the first time, Rome's armies were no longer purely Roman, and when the shield wall formed, its discipline was still impressive, but its soul was gone. Then came the century of chaos, 100 years when the empire tore itself apart from within. Between 235 and 284 CE, more than 20 emperors claimed the throne, most of them military men raised by their own legions and murdered by them soon after. The army, once the guardian of Rome, became its executioner. Every general believed he could save the empire. None realized they were stabbing it to death in pieces. While civil wars raged, the frontiers burned. Germanic tribes crossed the Rhine. Persian kings invaded the east. The once unbreakable shield wall was forced to stretch, thinner and thinner, until gaps appeared that no amount of courage could fill. But the most dangerous enemy was not external. It was systemic fatigue. The empire's logistics, once its hidden genius, began to collapse. Supply lines broke down, taxes failed to reach the front, and corruption turned administrators into thieves. Discipline decayed from the top down. Centurions accepted bribes, legates sold promotions, and soldiers deserted not out of cowardice, but hunger. Rome had lost its rhythm. When Emperor Diocletian rose in 284 CE, he saw what Rome had become, a body still clothed in armor, but hollow inside. His reforms were desperate, brilliant, and ruthless. He divided the empire in two, doubled its bureaucracy, and turned its economy into a machine of taxation and surveillance. It worked, for a time, but every reform was another layer of control, every law another link in the chain. The empire that had once conquered through adaptability now survived through rigidity. The shield wall had become a prison. Even the gods changed. The old Roman pantheon gave way to mystery cults, to Christianity, to to divine emperors who demanded faith instead of loyalty. And in this spiritual shift lay the final fracture. Rome no longer believed in itself. By the 4th century, the empire's armies were a shadow of their ancestors. They still marched, still raised their scimitar, still shouted the same commands. But the formation broke faster, the morale crumbled sooner, and the silence of unity was replaced by the noise of confusion. The shield wall. Every empire has its turning point. The moment when expansion becomes defense, when discipline becomes burden, when unity becomes illusion. For Rome, it was not a single battle, but a collective exhaustion, a slow forgetting of the virtues that had built it. The shield wall still stood, but the empire behind it was fading. And as the sun set over the Rhine and Danube, a quiet truth settled like dust over the legions. Rome had not been conquered. It had grown tired of itself. When the walls of an empire fall, they do not vanish. They sink into the soil, into the stones, into the bones of the people who remain. Rome may have collapsed, but its order never truly died. Long after the legions disbanded, the echo of their footsteps still marched through the centuries. The shield wall, once the symbol of iron discipline and domination, became the silent blueprint for everything that followed. When the Western Empire finally crumbled in 476 CE, it did not fall in a blaze of glory, but in quiet substitution. Germanic kings ruled from Roman palaces. Latin remained the language of law. Roads built by Roman engineers still carried soldiers, merchants, and messengers. Even the barbarians who destroyed Rome found themselves living within its design. Rome had built more than a civilization. It had built a pattern. Its discipline, its structure, its obsession with hierarchy and efficiency became the foundation upon which Europe was reborn. The medieval church inherited its bureaucracy. Monarchs inherited its symbolism. Armies inherited its tactics. From the ruins of the legions rose the feudal knights, armored heirs of the Roman soldiers' endurance. From the Senate rose parliaments. From the imperial roads rose trade networks that would one day connect the world. Rome's fall was not an ending, it was a metamorphosis, yet the price of order was remembered. The people who lived through the empire's twilight learned that control could suffocate as much as protect. In the centuries that followed, Europe would swing between chaos and discipline, between the freedom of tribes and the structure of empires, trying to find the balance Rome had lost. Every dynasty that rose claimed to restore its glory. Every ruler who sought universal power, Charlemagne, Napoleon, Hitler, reached for the same illusion, that order could be absolute, that a wall could stand forever. And yet each one fell to the same truth. The wall that protects also confines. The system that brings unity eventually demands obedience. Archaeology has preserved fragments of that dual legacy. At Hadrian's Wall, the stones still whisper of the men who once stood shoulder to shoulder, facing the mists of the north. In North Africa, crumbling forts still bear the marks of Roman brickwork, perfect even after 2 millennia. And beneath the streets of modern cities, engineers still uncover roads paved by legionary hands, straight, deliberate, eternal. But perhaps the most powerful remnants are invisible. Modern armies still train in formations born from the Roman manuals. Modern law still uses Latin terms of command. Modern governments still operate on the same principles of logistics, taxation, and hierarchy that once defined an empire of 1,000,000 square miles. Rome's discipline outlived its temples. Even in philosophy, the ghost of the shield wall persists. The Stoics, who preached duty over desire, shaped the moral backbone of Roman life, and their ideas survive in every soldier's creed, every code of honor, every ideal of service before self. The Roman understood that the individual was fragile, but unity was immortal. That truth still haunts us. In every boardroom, every army, every nation that prizes order above empathy, we see the reflection of that ancient wall. But history, if it teaches anything, warns us of repetition. Rome's downfall reminds us that discipline without purpose becomes tyranny, that the same structures that create greatness can destroy it when they forget their meaning. When the shield wall ceased to move forward, when it stopped protecting and began imprisoning, Rome's destiny was sealed. Its legacy, however, endured, not as marble ruins, but as a paradox written into the human condition, our eternal struggle between chaos and control. And so, the Roman shield wall did more than dominate battlefields. It rewired civilization itself, teaching humanity that unity is power, that precision can defeat passion, and that the price of perfection is the slow death of freedom. Every empire that rises inherits that lesson. Every society that demands order walks its shadow. And every soldier who locks shields with his brother, even today, hears the faint whisper of Latin commands carried through time. Ad gredere, tenete lineam, advance, hold the line. 2,000 years have passed since the last Roman legion marched beneath its crimson standards. The armor has rusted, the eagles have fallen, the empire's marble is dust. And yet, Rome is still here. Not in its stones, but in its systems. Not in its armies, but in our institutions. Not in its shield wall, but in our minds. Every nation that values hierarchy, every army that drills in formation, every bureaucracy that prizes order over empathy, they all echo the rhythm that once beat beneath Roman shields. We still live in the world that the Testudo built. Modern warfare carries its DNA. When soldiers today advance in coordinated units, when tanks roll side by side in unbroken lines, when drones swarm in patterns mapped by algorithms, that is Rome's ghost at work. The shield wall has evolved, but its essence remains: protection through unity, domination through coordination. Even our corporations, our governments, our social structures mirror the Roman ideal, where systems matter more than individuals, where loyalty outweighs emotion, and where stability becomes the highest virtue. We've learned how to build the wall higher, stronger, smarter, but we have not yet learned how to live without it. The Roman shield wall was born from fear, the fear of chaos, and that fear still guides us. We build our societies to keep disorder at bay, to create predictability, to survive the uncertainty of the world. But in doing so, we repeat Rome's paradox. The more we protect ourselves, the more we risk suffocating behind our own defenses. Empires may fall, but structures endure, and if we are not careful, so will their mistakes. So when we look back on the shield wall, let us see more than iron and formation. Let us see a mirror, reflecting both the genius and the fragility of civilization. The Romans mastered the art of holding the line, but the truest question for us, centuries later, is not whether we can hold it, it's whether we can let it go.